Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of Business Breeders, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Director of Goodman Group in the Goodman School of Business. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses, and entrepreneurs actively pursuing growth through accredited professional development certificate programs, executive education, consulting services, and startup support. We have well over 150 registered for today's session. And it is my pleasure to welcome so many of you from so many geographies to today's session to take a break and take part in this webinar. This webinar series aims to provide 45 minutes of breeders filled with insightful discussions on timely topics that are relevant to businesses and everyday lives, led by award-winning Brock University faculty and leading industry experts, encouraging thoughtful debates and keeping us all feeling connected together. This webinar series is hosted on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:45 a.m. In a moment, I'll hand the screen over to today's webinar lead, Dr. Camille Rutherford, who will talk about the topic of distributed leadership. For those of you who have joined us before, you know the format, but for those who this may be their first session, we'll just quickly go through the format for today's session. So, Dr. Rutherford will speak for approximately 30 minutes, and then there will be a time to answer your question, some of which we have received at the time of registration. Thank you very much for those. But also, the chat feature is now open, where you can type in your question, which could be addressed. Also, for those of you who are interested in live tweeting, I would encourage you to put your comments and questions and live tweet them at GSB Goodman Group, all one word. At the end of this webinar, I'll provide details on how you can access today's webinar recordings. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's webinar lead. Dr. Camille Rutherford is an Associate Professor of Education, and she is the Vice-Provost for Strategic Partnerships and International at Brock University. Her work with teachers, adult educators, educational leaders, and technology companies explores the use of technology to transform leadership and enhance teaching and learning. Dr. Rutherford has been able to merge her doctoral research regarding teacher leadership and her postdoctoral work related to distributed leadership with an enduring interest in technology to support the development of tech-enabled solutions to educational challenges. In addition to her teaching, as if she has time, and research, again, requires a bunch of time and focus, which is especially paramount in this COVID-related era, Dr. Rutherford has mentored and served on the advisory board of several early-stage ed tech startups, where her experience working with multinational tech companies such as Microsoft, IBM, Pearson, and Smart Technologies was utilized to support the transition from an innovative idea to the development of successful products and services. Well, that's quite a list, Camille. Welcome to today's session, and over to you for leading the session, Camille.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that is here for taking time out of your busy schedule to learn more about distributed leadership. It is a topic that I am very excited to share with you. It is a topic that I am very passionate about, and I hope that you will become equally passionate about this topic and influence on your daily lives and your organizations as a whole. So throughout this session, we're going to address three key things. The first is, what is distributed leadership? How can distributed leadership benefit your organization? And then finally, how you can use technology to enhance your leadership influence. But before we can get there, we need to take a look at these traditional understandings of leadership These were historically based on military figures, and unfortunately, very often it resulted in an overemphasis on military conquering, domination, and hypermasculine traits. This notion of leadership remained until the 20th century. It focused on individuals, their former roles, the power and authority they had to exert over each other. But as we get closer towards the end of the 20th century, we start seeing more people talk about leadership as a personality or a trait. And if that's what you believe, that leadership is a personality than trait, then it results in an understanding then that leaders must be born. This totally ignores the fact then that leadership can be a skill that can be learned. Our understanding of leadership has evolved. Starting in the 1990s, new ways of understanding leadership began to appear. These understandings paired leadership and influence and helped people to understand that leadership is equal to influence. Here are a couple of key quotes that will help your understanding. Leadership is a process of influence leading to the achievement of desired purposes. Again, it's key, this desired purposes. The next quote, by leadership, I mean influencing others' actions in achieving desirable ends. Leaders are people that shape the goals, motivation, and actions of others. When we start looking at these types of definitions of leadership, it highlights that you can be a leader regardless of your title. This can be very empowering when we acknowledge the role of leaders as well as followers and underlings that play a role in supporting the organization. It helps everyone to understand that they too can contribute to the organizational functions and goals. Openly discussing this type of leadership and this understanding of leadership across your organization can enhance employee motivation and engagement. As our understanding of leadership became more nuanced, we needed new approaches to understand and investigate organizational leadership. This is when distributed leadership was born. And it was born as a framework or a tool for understanding how leadership occurs. It was not conceived as a prescription, a remedy, or a model. It was created as a tool for examining the distribution of leadership function. The distributed leadership framework highlights that leadership can be distributed across people, that can be groups and roles, situations or activities. This may be an annual meeting or a 365 review. As well, it can be distributed across artifacts and documents that may be some of your policies. What are those key leadership functions? To use distributed leadership to investigate leadership, you must look at your key leadership functions and how they are enacted. Here are some of those key leadership functions. Research has highlighted that these key functions contribute to organizational effectiveness, setting directions, developing people, and developing the organization. And yes, those are only 3 key functions, but they're really quite broad, and we'll examine those now. Setting directions. Obviously, an organization cannot move forward if they don't know what direction they are going in. So the leadership functions that are connected to setting directions are identifying and articulating a vision, creating shared meetings, creating high performance expectations, fostering the acceptance of group goals, monitoring the organizational performance, and communicating the direction. It doesn't matter how great your mission or vision is if you don't, in an enduring manner, communicate those directions to everyone within your organization. That's why setting directions is so important. The next leadership function is developing people. I love this image because it highlights how leaders need to see themselves as coaches, supporting the development of others. Coaches don't win games. It's the players and those that you follow that execute those actions that help support and lead the organization. So when we look at developing people, It's important then that those leaders and those leadership functions offer intellectual stimulation that helps people learn more and grow, that it provides individualized support so that people can grow as individuals and become better leaders themselves. And most importantly, key to being a good coach is being a role model. You cannot lead people that do not think that you also embrace and model those important organizational activities and mission. The last key organizational function, leadership function, is developing the organizations. Leaders support the organization in getting better. They do that by strengthening the organizational culture, modifying organizational structures when needed. It's really important that your organizational structures are totally aligned with your organizational goals and functions. It's also important to build collaborative processes so everyone feels that they are a part of the organization. And then the last part is managing the environment. Developing the organization is not a one-time activity. It's an activity that you need to go back to and review and manage on an ongoing basis. One of the key benefits of distributed leadership is that it can help identify who is playing a role in these key leadership functions. But before we can discuss how distributed leadership identifies leaders or can help you identify leaders, it's important to acknowledge then that leadership is a dynamic activity. Just because you have a fancy title, the corner office, or play a role in a key leadership function does not mean you are always the leader in every situation. Leadership is dynamic. This snapshot highlights how leadership is dynamic and depends on the situation. If we look a little closer, we see at this moment, the player with the ball may be the leader. They're influencing the action of everyone else. But if we wait and go forward a few moments, this player without the ball may influence the action of others. They may set a screen, a pick that enables the player with the ball to go in and score, or the ball may be passed to them and they can score themselves. I would put my money on this person, this player that is charging in, that they have the potential to significantly change the action in a whole new direction. Remember, leadership distribution depends on the situation. Distributed leadership acknowledges that leadership is a result of a dynamic interaction between leaders and followers, and the leader can change depending on the situation. Jim Spallon, one of the leading scholars in this area that I had the privilege of working with for my postdoc, liked to say that leadership was a dance between the leader and the follower. Who's leading at that moment can change depending on the direction and the music. Thinking about leadership being a dance between leaders and followers can help you to understand how dynamic that interaction is. Thus, when you are looking to use a distributed leadership framework to identify leaders, remember then that leadership is not static. Just because you identified some leaders for that key situation, they may not always be a leader. So it's important that you take a comprehensive look throughout the entire organization and not just the formal leaders. This leads us to an important task that needs to be done for your organization to benefit from distributed leadership, and that is identifying nodes of influence. I want you to take a moment to reflect on the nodes of influence in your organization. And you can do that by answering this question. What are the most influential people, roles, activities in your organization? Just going to pause for a second for you to think about that. And you may even want to jot that down if you have a pen handy. What are the most influential people, roles, and activities in your organization? Here's another simple question that can help you to find the nodes of influence. Who or what do you go to for information and advice? Stop for a second. or what do you go to for information or advice? Would that be the same person that you just thought about in the previous slide? So it's important to realize then who you go to, who or what you go to for information and advice, especially related to setting directions, developing the people, and developing the organization. It may not be the same person as you thought about on your organizational chart. If you did think about the same person, and if you ask this simple question throughout your organization, and the same response keeps coming up, whether that's an organizational body, so a group, whether that's an individual person, or even a document or artifact, if you repeatedly get the same answer, you know that that person, function, or artifact is playing a key role in leadership. That question can be very helpful for a quick understanding of the distribution of leadership in your organization and identifying the nodes of influence. If you want a more formal approach, and definitely a really comprehensive approach, you can do this through a data-driven analysis, doing a social network analysis. On the screen here, I have a sociogram from a social network analysis from an organization or society you might know. This is a sociogram for the Game of Thrones. These social network analysis reveals a great deal about the true leadership interactions in your organizations. So we see these nodes, these circles. The bigger they are, the more influential they are. The more central they are, the more important they are within the organization. When we see the lines that go from these nodes to others, that highlights the strength of the connection. The wider and stronger the connection, the better that is for your organization. If we look a little bit closer into this social network analysis from Game of Thrones, I want to highlight these two people, Cersei and Joffrey. They are the formal leaders. They are the king and queen, but they're not a central node. They're not the most influential node. So that's why this approach can help you to identify the true leadership in your organization. It can also highlight the disconnect between formal leadership structures and the lived leadership in your organization. In contrast, let's look at these two individuals, Tyrion and Jon Snow. They have more connections across the organization, across their kingdom. This highlights the great potential that they have to influence others. So if you and your organization is looking at an organizational change, you want to look for these nodes that have lots of connections to others. If you can empower them and get them on board and supporting your change, that will help your change process to be more successful. It also can be useful for identifying up and coming leaders. So if we look down at the bottom and we see Samwell, that can be helped you identify, here is someone that's not in a leadership role, but they are a key connector or influencer of others. If we take a look at Jon Snow, and again, we see the multiple connections that he has. If Jon Snow was not a person, but instead a group, an action, a situation, that would help to see that there is a lot of resiliency in that organization because there's lots of connections. What you want to be wary of is this. Take a look at this node. This is Darian. Now, if this connection, this node that is sitting outside or distance from the main body of your organization, if that's connecting to external bodies, that's great, because that's called boundary spanning. That node can bring new information, new ideas, and new innovations into your organization. But if that node is a part of your organization, it can be very problematic, because if that one person disappears, the connection of that node to the rest of the organization is gone. That unit can then go rogue, and its work may not be aligned with the rest of the organization. One of the key challenges we have very often in leadership is when someone leads, the good work and benefits leaves with them as well. So that's why it's important to look for resiliency. So again, once you've identified the nodes of influence, you can use this information to identify informal leaders, which is very important for succession planning. You can use that to restructure and make sure that we have strong connections and strong relationships in your organizations. And you can also make sure that there are multiple connections to a key leadership function, and that can help build organizational resilience. Now that we have a better understanding of distributed leadership and how it can be used to investigate the distribution of leadership function across roles, situations, and artifacts, we can identify the nodes of influence and be able to use technology to better enhance those relationships. When we specifically use technology to enhance leadership influence, I like to call this tech-enabled leadership. Tech-enabled leadership can be defined as leadership that takes advantage of the affordance of technology to enable leadership actions that are open, collaborative, and dynamic. Again, many of these types of activities would not be possible without technology. And even if they are possible, they very often would be overly burdensome. So let's take a look further into open, collaborative, dynamic leadership actions that benefit from technology. So the first one is open. Open leadership action focuses on making leadership transparent. It provides an open window into how leadership is enacted. Simple technology tools like blogs or a newsletter can help the rest of the organization understand those leadership actions. It can be a challenge for many people, it is a challenge for many organizations that people don't fully understand what leadership does and what leaders do until they're in that seat. Creating open leadership functions helps more people to understand what those leadership functions are and how they take place. It can help create a strong bench of future leaders. Collaborative leadership actions acknowledge the fact then that leadership cannot be done alone. Collaborative leadership invites the contribution of others. It acknowledges that the we is greater than the me. So technology resources like Office 365 and Google Docs make it significantly easier to collaborate across an organization. Without technology, it would be overly burdensome to have large numbers of people collaborate and contribute to the implementation of those key leadership functions. Taking a look at dynamic leadership, it acknowledges that the process of being influenced is a dynamic interaction where the influence goes back and forth. It embraces the fact then that we take turns depending on the situation. We take turns being the leader and the follower. So when we use tools like Zoom, Google Meet, Skype, especially when you turn on the chat feature like we're using today, then we have a two-way street of information going back and forth and a two-way process of influencing others. So it's really important that you have those multiple connections, multiple ways for information and influence to go back and forth. I hope you can see how technology can enhance individual and organizational leadership influence by allowing you to influence others on a much greater scale and scope. I hope that you will become equally passionate and somewhat obsessed with tech-enabled leadership and distributed leadership. If you have any difficulty remembering open, collaborative, dynamic, OCD, that's a great way for me to remember that. That this can help you identify the nodes of influence so that we are better prepared to use technology to enhance that. It's important to realize then that tech-enabled leadership can benefit individuals as well as organizations as a whole. Creating leadership functions that are open to the entire organization, that let others collaborate, and that embrace dynamic interactions where leaders can be influenced by followers, help to strengthen your organizational leadership functions and strengthen the organization as a whole. So I'd like to conclude with 3 key tips. Number 1, use distributed leadership to investigate the distribution of leadership function. It's important to periodically step back and investigate the distribution of leadership in your organization. Investigate the nodes of influence, the weak spots, the loose connections. Look for opportunities to restructure and to build resiliency. The second tip is to use technology to enhance your individual leadership, as well as the organizational leadership. Technology can enhance the scale and scope of leadership influence. Look for ways that technology can allow you to interact with a greater number of people or different people and at a different scale. As well, technology is a great resource for you to interact and influence stakeholders outside of your organization as well as within. I want to use today's session as a key example. I want you to think about how many people here today, and I know there's over 100 people here today, how many people would have been able to participate in this session had it been on campus? Had we all been in one room at this specific time point? Not very many, but because using technology, it's enabled me to influence more people, significantly influence the number of people than I could just face-to-face. And it's allowed me to influence people across the globe, because it's my understanding there's lots of people participating from lots of different countries. So again, this is a key example, this webinar itself, of how technology can enhance leadership. The last thing, and I'm asking you, all organizational leaders that are participating today, to take this back to your organization. Everyone can be a leader. The distributed leadership framework validates this potential and the role then that many people play in those key leadership functions of setting directions, developing people, and developing the organization. Please, please embrace this and take this back to your organization. At a time like today, with everything that's happening in our world, it's more important than ever that we have leaders and we empower people to be leaders. My final thought is this: if your actions inspire others to learn more, dream more, and become more, you truly are a leader. Please remember this. I'm happy to take any questions that we now have.
Thank you, Camille. Those were really insightful. We've received a bunch of questions here. So let me put this first one to you as I look into my other screen. What advice would you give an informal leader to support their colleagues, especially during this COVID time?
For them to understand that they are a leader, that they are playing a role in those key leadership functions, and that to look for ways to enhance that leadership, especially in our current context, that you can use technology, which will be a very powerful tool right now, to reach out to more people, to connect to them. That can also help you as an individual basis build your influence and build your connections throughout the organization. We have a tendency to just interact with the people that are close to us. When we do this type of social network analysis in lived organizations, we see that proximity plays an outsized role. So if there's a key person who has their office close to you, very often it's easy to influence them or to be influenced by them. But as organizations are now all online and they're distributed across the country, it's more important than ever that we're using that technology to reach out to those individuals that may be have a loose connection or that need to feel empowered. So I think that's one of the key things then that all leaders, whether they're a formal leader or informal leader, can do during this pandemic.
So would you advise that they effectively cold calling, reaching out to individuals with emails or whatever that connection may be, or would you rather say that there should be some form of a structured approach, whether it's a virtual coffee or meet and greet?
I think that you can do both. One of the key ways, and I think is fantastic, is the blogs or newsletters, and sharing those with other people in the organization that they can go back and look at those things when they are ready. That will help you to understand the connections that people have. A number of years ago, I was asked to do a briefing about the use of a specific technology in a school, and the school district asked me to do this briefing. And I wrote it up and I sent it to them, and I thought, okay, yeah, the 12 people on their board that are looking at this will be influenced. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to put that same briefing on my blog. Over a weekend, over 200 other people read that. So again, a simple thing like a blog can take advantage of the long tail and influence even more people. So that's a great way to start. And then look who has read your blog or looked at it, and then reach out and make those connections. As well, I think Twitter is an absolutely fantastic leadership tool to start building connections within your organization or outside. And now as organizations are taking advantage of things like Microsoft Teams or Slack, it may make it easier to connect with those people. So I would probably do some of those things before reaching out to people as an individual by email. Because if I don't know you and I haven't previously been influenced by you, I don't know why I should even respond to your email. But give them a particular topic that you want to gather and collaborate with them about.
Right. Great. Thank you for that. Here's one that's sort of picks up on a tail that you left there. How can distributed leadership be used positively to ensure organizational and societal transformation?
Again, one of the key things is identifying those nodes of influence. Just a few seconds ago, I was talking about Twitter. There are some great plug-in tools that are very easy, even if you're not technologically savvy, that you can identify the key leaders based on their tweets, who's retweeted them, the level of impact that those have had. So I think that that's a great way there. Identifying informal leaders. And we know that in so many organizations, there are people that are working really hard and influencing others. Let them know that you see them as a leader. I think this is really important for frontline workers, for senior leadership to realize and support them and help them to understand what you do on a daily basis as a frontline worker impacts our organizational goals. Just having that connection and that message to them highlights the relevance of what they do on a daily basis. So identifying leaders, empowering those leaders, and letting them know that they too are important and contributing to the organization are ways that that can help to distributed leadership, can help to benefit the organization as a whole.
People of color and marginalized communities form a significant portion of frontline workers in a number of geographies and areas. So here's a question related to that. How do the current interpretations of distributed leadership impact marginalized and other oppressed groups in practice?
So again, because the distributed leadership framework acknowledges that leadership is distributed, the first thing that those people should understand is you are a leader. You are influencing the actions of others. So that's the first important thing, to empower them and know then that they play a very important role in an organization. It can also help you to take that distributed framework and look at those weak connections and those weak nodes to see if you are disempowering certain groups within your organization. If certain people are not coming up on your social network analysis, there's something wrong. They may be excluded from those actions, and there may be organizational barriers from allowing them to participate in those organizations. So that's another really important way that you can use a distributed framework, that you're identifying those nodes of influence to see who is there and who is playing a role in those actions, but also to figure out who is not there and why are they not there. Do we need to do something to make sure that they are a part of our organization, that they have a stronger connection to our organizational functions and those leadership functions? So I think that that's another really important way that you can use a distributed framework to support marginalized peoples.
Great, thank you for that. On the social network diagram, or the sociogram as you call it, does it depend on what outcomes we seek from the leader? For example, some nodes fill unique places because they connect other networks. They may be the connectors. And how does that might impact leadership?
That highlights the dynamic nature of leadership, that sociogram is not static. And it really depends on the question that you're asking. So if you're asking, who do you go to for information or advice regarding developing people, that may be a different sociogram than who do you go to for information and advice when it comes to developing the organization or setting directions. So it's important to understand that that sociogram is dependent on the question that you are asking, and that can depend on the leadership function. So that's why it's important to have a really comprehensive approach that when you're doing that, and I'm certain that that could be an opportunity for the Goodman group to be assisting in organizations, helping them to understand the nature of the distribution of leadership within the organization, who is playing a role and who is not playing a role. And it can be helpful to have an objective outsider to be able to do that. I remember doing my postdoc and doing a presentation about a sociogram for educational organization. And I asked them to point to the node that they thought was the leader. And they all pointed to the wrong node. They pointed to an informal leader. The actual principal, the formal leader of the organization, was way on the outside. And then they were not happy when I pointed that out to them. So I think that that can be a really important role to help identify those nodes, what those influential connections are.
Very interesting example. Thank you for sharing that. So here's another one that's come through. It's very important to have leaders at every level. But if everyone can be a leader, who will be accountable?
Again, and I think that's one of the things that some people may see as a weakness of distributed leadership, is that they think that it's a prescription or a model, and it's not. It's just, again, a tool to investigate that. And the distributed framework does not say leadership should be totally distributed and that everyone should be playing the equal role in that. It doesn't say that at all. There are times where there has to be, especially when it comes to accountability, a key leader that then is playing that leadership role and directly influencing others. So it does not say that everyone is a leader. It can say then that many people play a role in those leadership functions. But it doesn't discount the need for formal leaders that have key specific responsibilities and accountabilities for specific actions.
Right. Thank you for that. Here's another one. What are some of the weaknesses of distributed leadership in your opinion?
So one of the key things just touched on there is then people very often think then distributed leadership framework means then leadership should be distributed equally across the entire organization, that you would flatten your organizational chart and that then would make leadership better. No, it doesn't. It depends again on the organization. It depends on the leadership function. And it depends on the number of leaders and followers that take place with that. And that is definitely one of the greatest misconceptions that leads to that weakness related to distributed leadership. People say, we're going to be an organization that embraces distributed leadership. We're going to distribute leadership and let everyone be involved in anything. And you're not going to get the improved organizational benefits from that. So you really need to look at who is playing a role, who is not playing a role, and that how is that distributed, not that it's equally distributed.
So here's one that brings technology and its disbursement and leadership together. How can distributed leadership practices be implemented in rural areas where availability of technological resources may be a barrier?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. So it's really important to understand some of the technological parameters related to the technology that you're using. So the technology that we're using today requires a lot of bandwidth. So you don't want to make all of your key leadership functions be dependent on using this one tool, because people who do not have an appropriate level of internet connection won't be able to benefit from that. But then doing things like capturing this as a video and putting that on YouTube, which has a lower bandwidth requirement, enables people who may not have those technological connections to be able to utilize and do that as well. The other thing that can help is, again, understanding the technological parameters is the fact then that we're using this tool today and we're not turning everyone's cameras on. That can eat away at bandwidth as well. So it's important to understand that technology. What are the technological resources that require high bandwidth and what are the ones that require low bandwidth? So look for opportunities where then people can then go and download and benefit from those leadership resources when they're offline, and that will help to conserve their bandwidth, and to be cognizant that not everybody has the same technological resources. So that's why you can create a webinar like this, but capture it, put it online for people to be able to look at that as well, using things like Office 365 and Google Docs. All have different levels of bandwidth. So I think that's really important, that if you truly want to be a tech-enabled leader, you do need to understand the technology and the requirements of some of that, understanding what requires a lot of bandwidth and what is very easy to use in multiple areas. So if you are creating leadership resources, activities, situations that use low bandwidth technology to work with your followers to influence other people, that way you know more people can participate in those leadership actions.
This may be a good time for our viewers to say, those who are registering with us, you will receive a recording of this webinar on any other webinar that you are registering for in your inbox ahead of everyone else. And a recording of this becomes also available on our website further down the road. I just wanted to take that point in there. But I do have a few other questions for you, Camille, that have come through. Informal leaders may struggle to influence or support other members to attain group goals at times because they are in equal positions at work, without the hierarchy being in place there. What is your advice for these situations?
So again, if you are an informal leader and you're looking to sort of move up in the hierarchy, then develop your understanding of all of those key leadership functions and how they are enacted at your organization. That will help you to be better prepared to contribute to those leadership functions and for you to be seen as a leader in and of yourself. I think the other thing is to really have a collaborative approach, that you are collaborating, connecting to others, not because eventually I want to be a leader, but because I innately know I can benefit from the insight that others can provide to me. So again, as we saw with that leadership as a dance, it's a two-way street. You can't think, oh, I'm going to be influencing all these other people, but not leave yourself open to be influenced by them as well. So that's an approach and a mindset that you need to have as well. So understanding your leadership functions within your organizations, opening yourself to collaborations and learning from others as well. And again, I'm going to go back to my OCD, having a dynamic approach. So being open in your own leadership actions and practice, being collaborative, and seeing then and understanding that leadership is dynamic. That can help you to play a greater role in your organization and can help you to move from an informal leader to a formal leader.
And here's one more in here. Okay, let's just, I'm going to scroll to the right page here. How can distributed leadership be maximized by informal organizations? For example, activist groups such as Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I think again, for activist groups, definitely embracing technology. We're seeing a lot of that right now, and those informal leaders that, again, I'm sorry to go on and on about Twitter, but I absolutely love Twitter and I'm very passionate about it. So informal leaders can help to amplify a message by retweeting things and sharing those across their network as well. So if I'm on Twitter and I have 100 followers and you have 100 followers, by me sharing or amplifying something that you put out, it helps to increase the number of people that have been influenced by that. So again, as informal organizations, you can use those resources as well to identify your nodes of influence. Go and look through your Twitter stream and look at who are people that you are retweeting a lot. And that can help to coalesce that group and bring them together. Another simple thing like Twitter, and again, I apologize if I'm going on and on about Twitter. I do not own any Twitter stock, but I love it. That you can create a Twitter list that captures all the people that are connected to that movement and make it easier for them to interconnect with each other, as well then use the messaging to go back and forth. So then that social media, whether that is Twitter, that is Facebook, that is a number of different other technological social media resources, can help you identify, wait, who is this group? Right now we're distributed all across, but it can help people that have a common interest in supporting that cause and bringing them together and helping them to become a more formalized group as well.
Thank you very much, Camille. Those are very inspiring thoughts and insights into distributed leadership. And thank you for answering all of those questions. I truly appreciate your leadership and your expertise in this area, and for taking the time to join us today and to share all of this with all of our viewers. Thank you so very much. Well, viewers, that is all that we have time for today as part of this session of Business Breeders. I do want to apologize for those of you who posted your question and we may not have had the opportunity to respond in this session. We will do so offline via email. So thank you very much for all of your questions and participation throughout. Next week, we will be hearing from our next expert on the area of good governance, and especially in this time of crisis. The session, which is titled COVID-19 Good Governance in Crisis of a good governance in crisis or a good crisis for governance. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a link to this webinar to all of you who had registered, and sometime later the recording of this will be available. Our next session will be next week, Wednesday, again at 11 to 11:45. I hope you can join us then when we hear from Dr. Samir Trabelsi. Until then, stay safe.